This man thought he could harass a Hispanic woman without consequences until he realized who was sitting right behind him. Clara took a deep breath as the bustling energy of the airport enveloped her. She and Maria had just spent weeks in Jamaica, reconnecting with roots that felt both intimately familiar and distant after years of absence. The trip had been a mix of sweet reunions and poignant visits to places that reminded them of family members who were no longer there. Now, loaded with bags carrying more than just clothes, filled with crafts, spices, and a heavy dose of nostalgia, they queued for their flight back to London. Maria, always the more pragmatic of the two, checked their boarding passes again. "Mom, it looks like we're not sitting together. You're in 14C and I'm in 18D, she said, frowning slightly, not out of frustration, but in that protective way she had developed since they started traveling more together. Clara smiled, letting out a soft laugh. "It's okay, dear. It's only a few hours and I can manage. We'll be landing in London before you know it, and then we can laugh about this too." But internally, Clara felt a pang of disappointment. She had hoped to share the return flight using the time to absorb the last stretch of their trip together. As they moved through security, the efficiency of the process couldn't erase the warmth of the Caribbean sun still tingling on their skin or the echo of Jamaica's vibrant streets in their ears. The contrast between the relaxed rhythms of the island and the sterile corridors of the airport was stark, reminding them with each step that they were leaving something precious behind. Finally, as they boarded the plane, Clara navigated the narrow aisle with an ease that belied her years. Her seat was by the aisle, practical given her slight mobility issues, though not too severe. Maria was just a few rows back, across the way. They exchanged a look and a reassuring nod as Maria pointed to where she'd be, a silent pact to check on each other when they could. Settling into her seat, Clara placed her carry-on in the overhead compartment and sat down. Her handbag, containing only her phone and a book, remained in her lap. The seats around her were filling up quickly, the plane buzzing with the quiet hum of passengers stowing bags, fastening seatbelts, and exchanging courtesies. She smiled at a young couple across the aisle, sharing a moment of unspoken understanding as they wrestled with a particularly stubborn piece of luggage. Just as Clara was about to recline and immerse herself in her book, a shadow loomed over her. She looked up to see a man standing beside her, his expression clouded with impatience. He didn't smile or offer a greeting, just a brief nod as he indicated he needed to pass by her to get to the window seat. "Of course," Clara responded, her voice maintaining calm as she masked her surprise at his brusqueness. With a slight grimace, she began to rise, feeling the familiar protest of her knees. It was a small reminder of her age, usually ignored but occasionally convenient, like now, when she needed a bit more time to move. As she steadied herself to stand, the man sighed audibly, his body language radiating annoyance. Clara's heart sank a little. She had hoped her return trip would be as serene as her visit had been rejuvenating. Determined not to let this interaction set the tone for her flight, she mustered a smile and stepped aside, allowing him to pass. Once seated again, she tried to shake off the discomfort. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow that filtered through the plane's windows. It bathed the cabin in a soft, warm light, a stark contrast to the cold interaction she had just experienced. Clara reclined, closed her eyes, and thought of home, both the one she had just left and the one she was returning to, finding comfort in the thought that no matter the small troubles that might arise, she was on her way back to where she belonged. Clara had just settled into her seat when the man who had passed by her, now identified by his boarding pass as David, took the window seat. There was a palpable chill from him that seemed to fill the small space, making the air between them heavy with unspoken tension. Clara, always the peacemaker, decided to break the ice. "It's been a long day, hasn't it?" she offered with a gentle smile, hoping to ease the evident discomfort. David turned to look at her, his face twisting into a sneer that took Clara by surprise. "I would have preferred another seat," he muttered through gritted teeth, his tone laden with something stronger than annoyance. Clara's smile faltered, but she maintained her composure. "I'm sorry to hear that. These flights can be so tight. Let's hope we can make the best of it." She tried to focus on the book in her lap, a clear signal she wasn't interested in continuing an uncomfortable conversation. However, David wasn't finished. "No, you don't understand. I mean, I would have preferred not to sit next to someone like you." His voice was low but carried a sharp edge. Clara looked up, her eyes widening slightly. "Excuse me, What did you say? She asked, unsure she had heard correctly. David's lips curled into a disdainful expression. You heard me. It's bad enough being stuck in this seat, but next to a Hispanic woman. They should consider these things when assigning seats. The words hit Clara like a physical blow. Her heart raced, her hands trembled slightly, but she took a deep breath, striving to keep her voice steady. I believe everyone has the right to sit where they are assigned, regardless of, she paused, searching for the right words, how we look or where we come from. David scoffed, turning his gaze to the window. It's not about rights, it's about comfort, my comfort. People like you make people like me uncomfortable. Clara's mind reeled at the blatant racism, a stark and ugly contrast to the world she had just left in Jamaica, a place where her skin was not a mark of disdain but a badge of her heritage. She struggled to find words that might bridge the gap of understanding between them, but none seemed right. For a moment, the impulse to argue, to defend herself and assert her dignity was overwhelming, but she remembered Maria just a few rows behind and the countless battles she had fought and sometimes lost simply because of the color of her skin. I am here to travel just like you, she said finally, her voice lower but firmer. I'm not here to make you feel comfortable or uncomfortable. I'm just here. David turned to her, his eyes cold. Well, you're doing a terrible job just being here, he snapped. Just keep quiet and out of the way, that's what you can do best. Hurt by his words, Clara looked away, her hands gripping her book more tightly. She stared at the seat back in front of her, focusing on regaining her composure. The confrontation had shaken her, but she was determined not to let it define her journey. From her seat, Maria had missed the initial exchange, but noticed the tension. She kept her eyes on her mother, ready to intervene at the first sign of distress. Meanwhile, David settled into his seat, his displeasure evident in every line of his body as the flight prepared to take off. In that cramped space thousands of feet above the ground, Clara felt the weight of a lifetime of similar confrontations, each a reminder of how far society still had to go. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and prepared for the hours ahead, drawing strength from the resilience that had brought her this far. From a few rows back, Maria could hear the escalating tension. Her concern grew as she caught snippets of the conversation. Unbuckling her seatbelt, she made her way to her mother's row. Mom, is everything okay? She asked, her voice a clear signal of her protective stance. David glared at Maria as she approached. This is none of your business. Go back to your seat, he snapped, his eyes darting disdainfully between Maria and Clara. It is my business when you talk to my mother like that, Maria shot back, standing her ground. Her intervention drew the attention of nearby passengers, some of whom turned in their seats to watch the unfolding scene. Clara, feeling the weight of her daughter's concern, placed a hand on Maria's arm. It's all right, dear, let's not make a scene. But Maria wasn't ready to back down. No, Mom, it's not all right. He can't talk to you like that. As voices rose, a flight attendant hurried over, her face etched with concern. Is there a problem here? She asked, her tone professional but anxious. David turned to the flight attendant, his voice loud enough for several rows to hear. Yes, there's a problem. These two are harassing me. He gestured accusatorily towards Clara and Maria. The flight attendant looked between them, trying to assess the situation. Sir, please calm down. May I ask everyone to lower their voices? This is causing a disturbance, she said with a professional tone but underlying anxiety. Maria, her voice firm and clear, addressed the flight attendant. He has been verbally abusing my mother because of her race. We just want to have a peaceful flight. The flight attendant's eyes widened slightly at the mention of racial abuse, a serious accusation that changed the nature of the incident. I will need to report this. Please everyone, remain calm, she said, stepping away to speak into her intercom, likely calling for additional support. Meanwhile, passengers murmured among themselves, some shaking their heads in disapproval of David's behavior, while others tried to ignore the drama. In the tense silence that followed, Clara reached for her daughter's hand, squeezing it gently. Thank you, Maria, she whispered, her voice filled with both gratitude and sadness. Maria nodded, staying close to her mother. She looked around, aware of the eyes on them, but focused solely on providing comfort to Clara. The atmosphere in the cabin was charged with discomfort. The previous peace had been shattered by one man's intolerance. The flight attendants returned, this time with a more determined presence. I need everyone to calm down right now, the flight attendant said firmly. This kind of behavior is not acceptable on our flights. Sir, if you continue to cause distress to other passengers, we will have to take further action. David, realizing the seriousness of the situation, momentarily lowered his voice. I was just expressing my discomfort, he mumbled, trying to frame his intolerance as a mere complaint. Maria, however, was not willing to let the matter rest so easily. Your discomfort does not justify racism. It doesn't give you the right to belittle my mother or anyone else. The flight attendant nodded, acknowledging Maria's point. Everyone deserves to travel without being insulted or harassed. I'm going to consult with the captain about this situation. As the flight attendant walked away, David slumped in his seat, his lips tight, clearly calculating his next move. The air remained tense, but Maria's unwavering defense of her mother had shifted something in the cabin. Other passengers began murmuring amongst themselves, some expressing their disdain for David's behavior, others praising Maria's strength. Maria turned to her mother, softening her expression. Are you okay, Mom? Clara nodded, squeezing Maria's hand. I am now, thanks to you. The moment was a poignant reminder of the enduring strength between them, forged through years of mutual support in the face of both large and small challenges. Maria's stance was not just about confronting the man who had wronged her mother, but about asserting their dignity in the face of blatant racism. As they waited for the flight attendant to return, Maria's protective presence provided a silent yet powerful statement. She would always stand up for her mother, no matter the setting or the adversary. This act of defiance was a testament to her character and a clear demonstration of the deeply ingrained values Clara had instilled in her. As the confrontation between Maria, Clara, and David settled in the confined space of the plane, it inevitably drew the attention of other passengers. The initial discomfort of overhearing the harsh exchange gave way to a broader awareness, prompting some to take sides, either as vocal supporters or silent onlookers. A middle-aged man sitting across the aisle, who had been following the escalation with a frown, finally spoke up. There's no need for that kind of talk, he said, addressing David with a firm but disapproving voice. We're all just trying to get somewhere. No one should have to deal with being insulted like that. David glared at the man, but the intervention seemed to embolden others. A young woman with headphones around her neck leaned forward from the row behind Clara and Maria. He's right, she chimed in firmly. It's not okay to make someone feel unsafe or unwelcome. We hear you and we're with you, she said, nodding towards Maria and Clara. These passengers' responses triggered a ripple effect. More heads nodded in agreement, and some passengers murmured their support, creating a collective atmosphere of solidarity that sharply contrasted with the few who chose to remain disengaged, their eyes fixed on their devices or the seatbacks in front of them. The flight attendant returned, accompanied by another crew member, both clearly briefed and more determined to handle the situation. We're here to ensure everyone's comfort, announced the second attendant, addressing the collective audience that had formed. If anyone feels harassed or discriminated against, we encourage you to speak up. We take this very seriously. Their words seemed to formalize the divide between allies and adversaries. The proactive stance of the attendants reassured Clara and Maria, providing a sense of institutional support that had initially seemed absent. David, feeling the weight of many eyes on him, slumped in his seat, his bravado diminishing. I was just saying how I felt. I didn't mean to cause a scene, he muttered with less conviction. Maria, however, was not willing to let the matter dissipate. Saying how you feel doesn't give you a free pass to be hurtful or racist. It's important that everyone understands that. The attendants nodded, their expressions serious. We will document this incident, confirmed one, looking directly at David. Please, let's try to keep the peace for the remainder of the flight. As they walked away, the conversation buzzed through the cabin. The incident had sparked discussions about race, respect, and the role of community intervention in such disputes. Some passengers shared their own experiences, while others reflected on the importance of standing up for what is right, even in uncomfortable settings. Clara, witnessing the support unfold, felt a complex mix of gratitude and sadness. She was thankful for the voices rising in her defense, but lamented that such interventions were still necessary. Maria squeezed her mother's hand, a silent acknowledgement of the bittersweet victory. As the plane cut through the clouds, Clara found herself sinking into the depths of her memory. Each of David's unpleasant words awakened echoes of a past filled with similar battles. She looked out the small window beside her, the endless blue a stark contrast to the storm of emotions inside her. Clara's journey from Jamaica to London years ago had been driven by hope and the promise of new opportunities. But upon arrival, she quickly learned that the streets of London were not paved with the gold of opportunity, but often with the harsh gravel of intolerance and discrimination. In her early days in London, Clara faced a cold reception. The vibrant Caribbean immigrant community did its best to thrive amidst adversity, but the chill of racism was pervasive. Clara found herself repeatedly confronting prejudice, not just socially, but also in the job market. Her accent and skin color were objects of scrutiny and bias, creating barriers difficult to overcome. As she settled in, working various jobs from cleaning offices to assisting in a local school, Clara made friends who shared her struggles. Together, they supported each other through the challenges of adapting to a new country while facing blatant racism. They celebrated small victories and mourned losses together, including the tragic losses of friends who were victims of racial violence, a painful reminder of the dangers they faced simply for being who they were. Clara's thoughts focused on a particularly heroic incident, the wrongful arrest of a close friend accused of a crime he hadn't committed. The event had been a galvanizing moment for her, leading her to engage in community advocacy and protests against police brutality. Those efforts, filled with desperation and determination, had strengthened her resolve, but also deepened her sense of alienation. Reflecting on these experiences, Clara realized how they had forged her into the woman she was today. Resilient, firm yet weary from having to justify her existence. She had hoped that over time society would change, that the battles fought by her generation would pave the way for a more accepting and understanding world. Yet here she was, decades later, defending her right to exist in a space she had rightfully paid to occupy. A reminder that some battles were ongoing. The pain of her past was a heavy weight, but also the source of her unyielding strength. Every insult hurled at her over the years had been met with silent resistance, every act of discrimination countered with dignity. As Maria leaned over to gently squeeze her hand, bringing her back to the present, Clara felt a surge of gratitude. Her daughter's courage and fierce protection on that flight were a testament to the courage she had instilled in her. The tension in the cabin had escalated to a nearly palpable level, with whispered discussions and uncomfortable glances exchanged throughout the plane. David, simmering with frustration after being challenged by Maria and reprimanded by other passengers, grew increasingly agitated. His words became harsher, his behavior more threatening. As another harsh word left David's lips, a new voice suddenly cut through the tense atmosphere. "Enough!" The command was sharp and carried a weight that silenced the immediate area. All eyes turned towards the source, a tall, broad-shouldered man who had been sitting quietly a few rows behind Clara and Maria. The man, named Jack, stood up, his presence commanding attention. He moved towards David's seat with a determined stride, his face set in a firm expression of disapproval. "Sir, you need to stop this right now. There is no place for your behavior on this flight or anywhere else," Jack said unequivocally, standing over David with an air of authority. David looked up, momentarily taken aback by Jack's intervention, his face reddening with anger as he replied, "And who are you to tell me?" Before David could finish, Jack cut him off. "I'm someone who believes in treating others with respect, something you failed to show." His voice was calm, but carried a steely edge. The cabin fell silent, the tension shifting as passengers sensed the change in dynamics. Seeing his verbal assaults gaining no ground and now physically overshadowed, David's defiance wavered. However, as he opened his mouth to launch another insult, he made a slight movement as if to rise aggressively. Reacting quickly, Jack stepped closer, placing a firm hand on David's shoulder, pushing him gently but firmly back into the seat. "You're not going anywhere. Sit down and shut up. You're causing distress to everyone around, and that's going to stop." David, feeling the firm pressure of Jack's hand, settled back, his anger now mixed with a hint of fear. The physical intervention seemed to cement the new boundaries set by Jack, marking him as a protector and an unexpected hero in the eyes of Clara, Maria, and the other passengers. Clara, who had watched the scene unfold with a mix of shock and relief, found her voice. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying a warmth that spread through the nearby seats, dispelling the cold grip of the earlier confrontation. Jack nodded at Clara, then turned his gaze around the cabin, addressing the other passengers as well. "Let's try to have a peaceful flight from here on out. "There's no reason for anyone to feel threatened or uncomfortable," he declared, his tone setting a new expectation for the rest of the journey. The flight attendant, having witnessed Jack's intervention, approached him. "Thank you for your help, sir. We'll take it from here. Please, return to your seat." As Jack returned to his place, the flight attendant gave him a grateful nod, her expression one of relieved gratitude. As calm was restored in the cabin, Maria leaned towards her mother, whispering, "That was incredible." Clara nodded, her eyes following Jack as he returned to his seat. She felt a renewed sense of security, a marked contrast to the vulnerability she had experienced moments earlier. Jack's intervention had not only shifted the immediate power dynamics, but also left a lasting impact on the atmosphere on board. David remained silent, subdued by the assertive stance taken by Jack. The rest of the passengers, encouraged by the resolution and stand against intolerance, engaged in quieter, more relaxed conversations. The atmosphere had lightened, and a sense of community, though temporary, had been forged in the face of adversity. After the dramatic intervention by Jack, the flight attendants huddled near the front of the cabin, whispering urgently among themselves. Clearly, they were trying to devise a strategy to handle the disruption without further escalating tensions. However, the resolution they reached would soon reveal a flaw in their understanding of the dynamics of the situation and a misstep in their approach to resolving the conflict. With a clipboard in hand, the lead flight attendant first approached Clara and Maria, her expression a mix of professional concern and underlying anxiety. "Ma'am, we need to ensure the safety and comfort of all our passengers," she began, her voice low but firm. "We're going to relocate you and your daughter to help de-escalate the situation." Maria, taken aback, responded immediately. "Why are we the ones being moved? We were just defending ourselves." "He's the one causing all the trouble," she said, subtly gesturing towards David, who watched the exchange with a satisfied expression. The flight attendant sighed, a flicker of sympathy crossing her face momentarily before she regained her composure. "I understand, but we believe this will help keep the peace for the remainder of the flight," she explained, avoiding direct eye contact with Maria as she spoke. Reluctantly, Clara nodded, understanding the difficult position the flight attendants were in, but feeling a pang of injustice. She gathered her belongings and, with Maria, followed the attendant down the aisle to their new seats several rows back. The move attracted curious glances from other passengers, some of whom shook their heads in disapproval of the airline's decision. As they settled into their new seats, Maria whispered furiously, "This isn't right, Mom. They're just making it easier for him by moving us instead of dealing with the real problem." Clara placed a calming hand on Maria's arm. "I know, dear, but let's not let this ruin our trip any more than it already has. We know we did nothing wrong." Meanwhile, the flight attendants returned to David, offering a superficial reprimand. "Sir, please remain calm and refrain from any comments or actions that could be seen as disruptive," said one of them, her tone lacking the firmness that might have conveyed genuine authority. David nodded, giving a half-hearted apology before settling back into his seat, clearly satisfied with the outcome. He had effectively been rewarded for his behavior, with no real consequences for his actions. This misstep by the flight crew highlighted a broader issue often seen in handling racial incidents: the tendency to prioritize superficial peace over justice, inadvertently perpetuating the behaviors they aim to discourage. By relocating Clara and Maria instead of directly addressing David's racism, the authorities on the plane had sent a clear message: the burden of maintaining harmony often falls on the victims of harassment, not the perpetrators. After ensuring that Clara and Maria were somewhat settled in their new seats, Jack returned to his. However, his involvement in the incident was not over. He pulled out his smartphone, a device he typically used to connect with his large following on various social media platforms. As an influencer who frequently discussed social justice issues, Jack recognized the potential impact of the incident he had just witnessed. With a frown, he began drafting a post. First, he uploaded a video he had discreetly recorded of the altercation, capturing David's vitriolic comments and the inadequate response from the flight crew. The video was clear, the audio crisp enough to discern the troubling words and the insufficient reaction from the authority figures on the plane. Jack's caption was succinct yet powerful. "I witnessed and intervened in a clear case of racial harassment on my flight today." The response: "The victims moved to keep the peace. Is this how we handle racism now?" The plane landed on the runway at Heathrow Airport in London under a gray sky that seemed to reflect the somber mood inside the cabin. As the aircraft taxied to the gate, The passengers who had been caught in the turbulence of the conflict during the flight prepared to disembark. For Clara and Maria, the end of the flight brought a mix of relief and apprehension about what might follow. The incident that had flared up in the skies was now gaining traction on the ground. Jack's video had circulated widely, sparking outrage and promoting a broader conversation about racism and accountability in public spaces, particularly within the airline industry. The hashtag Justice for Clara was trending, with social media users calling for a boycott of the airline until it adequately addressed their grievances. As the passengers began to gather their belongings, murmurs and whispers filled the cabin, with many casting sympathetic glances towards Clara and Maria, now recognized from the viral video. Others typed furiously on their phones, likely sharing their own accounts of the flight or responding to the ongoing social discourse. The airline, aware of the storm brewing online, had taken steps to formulate a response. Public relations staff hurriedly convened at the airport, preparing to handle the fallout. As passengers disembarked, they distributed press credentials and set up a small coordination area for a press conference, anticipating the arrival of journalists drawn by the viral incident. As Clara and Maria walked down the jet bridge into the terminal, they were met by airline representatives who expressed apologies and offered additional assistance. The representatives were polite but clearly nervous, aware of the cameras beginning to gather in the terminal. Meanwhile, David, the man at the center of the controversy, exited the plane quietly, trying to avoid being noticed. His earlier bravado had dissipated, replaced by a palpable anxiety about the potential real-world consequences of his actions. Reporters, having caught wind of the story, quickly approached Clara and Maria for a statement. Maria, ever protective, stepped forward to speak on behalf of them both. "We hope this incident leads to real change, not just in this airline, but across the industry. No one should have to endure what my mother experienced today," she said, her voice firm and clear. The airline's prepared statement, read by a spokesperson during the impromptu press conference, promised a thorough investigation and reiterated their commitment to customer safety and dignity. However, the statement did little to quell the public's dissatisfaction, with many viewing it as a standard response lacking genuine commitment to addressing the underlying issues. Throughout the day, news outlets aired stories about the incident, featuring interviews with other passengers and excerpts from Jack's video. The narrative was no longer confined to the witnesses on the plane. It had captivated a global audience, prompting discussions about racial sensitivity and the responsibilities of corporate entities in enforcing anti-discrimination policies effectively. As Clara and Maria left the airport, they felt the weight of their unexpected role in a broader dialogue about racial justice. While the immediate journey had ended, they knew that the larger journey toward equality and understanding had only just begun, fueled by the unwanted events aboard what should have been a routine flight. The incident had not only highlighted the prevalence of racial prejudice, but also the power of collective advocacy in confronting and challenging these deeply rooted issues. After the initial storm of media coverage and social outrage, Clara and Maria found themselves at the center of a legal confrontation that would test their resilience and commitment to justice. The decision to pursue legal action against David was not made lightly. It stemmed from a deep desire to ensure that no one else would have to endure what they had experienced. In the days following the flight, Maria contacted a lawyer specializing in civil rights cases. The lawyer, Ms. Parker, was acutely aware of the social implications of the case and its potential to set a significant precedent. During their first meeting, she laid out the strategy clearly and systematically. "We need to gather all the evidence we can. Videos, witness statements, your own testimonies, everything will count. We're not just going against David, we're highlighting a systemic problem." Maria, always meticulous, had already compiled a digital folder of evidence, including the video posted by Jack and several witness comments that had been shared online. Meanwhile, Clara, though emotionally exhausted by the incident, found a renewed sense of purpose in these preparations. She recounted her experience to Ms. Parker, who listened attentively, pausing occasionally to note key details that might be crucial in court. The emotional cost of recounting the event was palpable. As Clara spoke, her voice trembled at times, a clear sign of the trauma still lingering beneath her composed exterior. Maria stayed close, holding her mother's hand, a silent pillar of support. After the meeting, both felt a heavy weariness, not just from the retelling, but from the weight of the journey they were about to undertake. Ms. Parker cautioned them about the potential challenges ahead. "Cases like this can be long and emotionally draining," she warned. "The defense will likely try to discredit your claims, possibly painting David's actions as isolated or provoked. We need to stay focused and keep the narrative grounded in facts and the undeniable evidence of discrimination. As the legal team got to work, subpoenas were issued for the airline's records, including the flight manifest and any internal reports made by the crew about the incident. Witness statements were formally gathered, with several passengers who had expressed their outrage online now stepping forward to offer official testimonies. Throughout the process, Clara and Maria found themselves in a whirlwind of legal complexities. At times, the scale of what they were undertaking became overwhelming. One night, as they sat together in their living room, Clara voiced her fears. "What if this all comes to nothing? What if they just sweep it under the rug?" she asked, her voice tinged with doubt and fatigue. Maria, sensing the strain but determined to see it through to the end, reassured her mother. "We're doing this not just for us, but for everyone who has been silenced. We have to try." The community around them rallied in support, with messages of encouragement flooding in through social media and local groups. Activists and advocacy organizations offered their assistance, viewing Clara and Maria's struggle as part of a broader fight against racial inequality. As the court date approached, the case against David began to symbolize more than just a response to an unpleasant encounter on a plane. It was becoming a significant public statement against racism, a declaration that such behavior would not be tolerated in any form, anywhere. Clara and Maria, fortified by their cause and community support, prepared to face the legal system, hopeful that their stance would contribute to broader change. As the court date approached, the wider community began to rally around them in a remarkable show of solidarity. The case had transcended its origins as a dispute on a flight and had touched a deeper collective nerve of resistance against racism. The support was both local and digital. Community leaders, local churches, and advocacy groups in London organized meetings and forums to discuss the case and its broader implications for racial justice in the UK. These events served not only as platforms for discussion, but also as fundraising opportunities to help cover Clara and Maria's legal expenses. Social media continued to play a crucial role. Supporters from around the world shared their own stories of discrimination and how they found strength in Clara and Maria's courage to stand up to their aggressor. A significant event was a community rally held in a local park, attended by hundreds of people from diverse backgrounds. Speakers included activists known for their work against racial discrimination, as well as individuals who had experienced similar injustices. Clara, initially reluctant to speak, was moved by the warmth and support of the crowd. Standing at the podium, she delivered an emotional speech about her experiences, her voice resonant with emotion but also strength. "We are here today not just for me and my daughter, but for every person who has been made to feel less because of the color of their skin," Clara declared. Her words met with cheers and applause. "This support is not just about our case. It's a clear and strong message that racism has no place in our society." Maria also spoke, emphasizing the role of the community in overcoming personal and systemic challenges. "Seeing all of you here today and reading your messages online reminds us that while we may be in the courtroom, we are not alone. This is our collective fight." Local media covered the rally, broadcasting images and speeches that further amplified the message. Interviews with Clara and Maria were aired, where they articulated their hopes for what the trial could achieve beyond their personal vindication: a broader recognition and rejection of racism. The support was not limited to moral and emotional backing. Financial contributions flowed in, ensuring that Clara and Maria could afford robust legal representation. Legal experts and experienced lawyers offered their advice and, in some cases, their pro bono services, recognizing the importance of the case in the broader civil rights struggle. The rising community support had a profound effect on Clara and Maria. Each gesture, every word of encouragement, and every shout of rallying cry reinforced their resolve and mitigated the emotional toll of the legal proceedings. The community's backing reminded them daily that their stance was part of a much larger movement, one that sought justice not only in the courtroom but in the very fabric of society. As the court date neared, the network of support that had crystallized around them was a vivid demonstration of the power of collective action. It was a testament to the impact that unity in the face of injustice could have, fostering a sense of hope and determination that resonated far beyond the confines of their immediate situation. The courtroom was packed when the trial of Clara, Maria, and David began. The public interest in the case had only intensified, with people lining up for hours to secure a seat in the gallery. Media cameras flashed incessantly, capturing every entrance of the participants into the courtroom, signaling the high-profile nature of this legal battle. David, once confident and brazen, now appeared visibly shaken as he made his way to the defendant's table. His earlier arrogance had been replaced by a nervous demeanor, his eyes darting around the room, perhaps fully realizing the gravity of the situation and the public scorn that had accumulated against him. As the proceedings began, Clara and Maria sat silently, their hands clasped together, their faces a mix of anxiety and determination. Their lawyer, Ms. Parker, delivered a compelling opening statement, outlining the basis of their case and emphasizing the social implications of allowing racial harassment to go unpunished. David's defense was flimsy at best. His lawyer attempted to paint the incident as a misunderstood overreaction, arguing that David's comments were a result of stress and did not constitute racial harassment. "My client regrets his choice of words," the defense attorney stated, trying to steer the narrative towards a less condemning conclusion. However, the evidence against David was overwhelming. The video recorded by Jack was played in court, its clarity leaving little room for doubt about the nature of David's comments. Witness testimonies from other passengers corroborated Clara and Maria's account, describing David's behavior as unprovoked and offensive. When David took the stand, his testimony did little to aid his case. Under cross-examination, his responses were erratic and contradictory. When Ms. Parker pressed him on why he felt justified in making racially charged comments, David stammered, his words crumbling under the weight of his own statements. I was just upset about other things. I didn't mean. It came out wrong," he mumbled, failing to provide a coherent defense. The public gallery murmured throughout the proceedings, with many spectators shaking their heads in disbelief at David's attempts to deflect responsibility. The tide of public opinion was not in his favor, and the palpable disapproval seemed to erode his composure even further. As the trial progressed, the impact of David's actions on his personal life began to emerge. Reports surfaced that his employer had suspended him pending the outcome of the trial, and he faced social ostracism. Friends and acquaintances distanced themselves, reluctant to associate with the negative publicity. His social media profiles were flooded with critical comments, and he eventually deactivated his accounts. The courtroom buzzed with tense silence as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. Clara and Maria, holding hands, awaited the decision with bated breath. The legal, emotional, and mental toll of the battle had culminated in this moment, a moment that would validate their suffering or diminish their struggle for justice. Based on the evidence presented and the witness testimonies, the court finds in favor of the plaintiffs, Clara and Maria. The judge paused, surveying the room before continuing. The defendant, David, is ordered to pay significant damages for his actions. The verdict sent a wave through the courtroom. Supporters of Clara and Maria, some wearing anti-racism pins and holding hands, let out quiet cheers and sighs of relief. The judgment was not only a personal victory for Clara and Maria, it was a symbolic win for all those who had ever faced racial discrimination. As the judge outlined the reasons for the decision, citing David's blatant disregard for the dignity and respect owed to his fellow passengers, Clara felt a mix of triumph and sorrow. The legal vindication was sweet, but she knew it did little to heal the deeper wounds inflicted by racism. The victory in court was a step towards justice, but the path to true equality and understanding remained overwhelmingly long. Outside the courtroom, Maria spoke to the gathered media, her words thoughtful and measured. Today's verdict sends a message that racism has no place in our society. But while we are grateful for this decision, we know that true justice isn't just about winning a case, it's about changing hearts and minds. It's about ending the need for these cases to exist. Clara, standing beside her daughter, nodded in agreement, reflecting on the long history of racial struggle, not just her own but that of countless others. This victory is for everyone who has been silenced, overlooked, and told they don't matter. Today we show that everyone matters, she said, her voice tinged with emotion. The victory was widely covered, with media outlets and social media discussing not just the outcome, but the broader implications for racial justice. Commentators hailed the case as a pivotal moment in the ongoing dialogue about race relations, particularly in public spaces and institutions. However, despite the public celebration, Clara and Maria faced the reality that legal victories do not erase the scars left by racial prejudice. The compensation they received could not undo the humiliation and pain they had endured, nor could it fully address the systemic racism that persisted. In the quiet of the early morning, Clara sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea, looking out the window at the soft dawn light heralding a new day. This quiet moment gave her space to reflect on the tumultuous events of the past months and ponder the true meaning of justice. The trial had ended, and by all accounts, they had won. Yet, as she sipped her tea, Clara wondered what they had truly gained. The legal victory was clear, but the emotional and philosophical victory was murkier, more elusive. Justice, Clara thought, was often portrayed as a balanced scale, an ideal where right and wrong were clearly defined and weighed equally. But her experience had taught her that justice was messy, entangled in human emotions and social prejudices that no court could fully untangle. True justice, Clara concluded, was not simply about the outcome of a trial but about recognition and reconciliation, about society acknowledging its faults and making genuine efforts to amend them. As she reflected on these thoughts, Clara realized that while the verdict had offered a form of closure, it had not healed the deeper wounds inflicted by the incident. The racism she had faced from David was a symptom of a larger societal illness, one that no judicial ruling could cure. This realization was both sobering and illuminating. Clara pondered the concept of reconciliation. True reconciliation, she concluded, involved community acknowledgement of wrongs and a collective effort toward healing. It was not just about one person changing their views or apologizing. It was about changing the fabric of society so that such incidents were less likely to occur. A few years later, in the quiet solitude of his apartment, David reflected on the ruins of his life, a life dismantled by his own words and actions. The isolation and repercussions had given him ample time to reflect on the path that had led him here, to this moment of painful clarity. As he replayed the incident, the raw realization of the harm he had caused others, especially Clara and Maria, became undeniable. Ashamed and genuinely remorseful for the person he had become, David decided it was time to take a step he had avoided out of fear and pride. He would apologize to Clara and Maria. Drafting a letter filled with his reflections and apologies, David expressed a sincere desire to make amends, not just through words but through ongoing actions that demonstrated his commitment to change. When Clara and Maria received David's letter, they were initially skeptical. Could someone change so fundamentally? But as they read his heartfelt words, they saw the reflections of a man genuinely struggling with his mistakes and the impact of his actions. After much discussion, they decided to meet with David to see for themselves the man he claimed to be. The meeting was tense at first, with emotions running high. David, humble and nervous, reiterated his apologies and shared his journey of personal growth since the trial. His volunteer work, his education on racial justice, and his active participation in community healing efforts. Clara and Maria listened carefully, weighing his words against the depth of their own pain. Over time, they began to see the sincerity in David's efforts. It was clear he was no longer the same man who had sat beside Clara on that plane. Moved by his genuine remorse and evident transformation, Clara and Maria found it in their hearts to forgive him. The act of forgiveness was not a dismissal of the past, but an acknowledgement of the possibility of change. It was a powerful moment for all involved, a small but significant step towards healing. As they parted ways, there was a sense of closure, not just for the pain and division, but for the chapter of their lives dominated by this conflict. For David, the forgiveness offered by Clara and Maria was both a relief and a responsibility, a reminder to continue his efforts to advocate against racism and rebuild his life on a foundation of understanding and respect. In conclusion, this chapter of reconciliation serves as a poignant reminder of the transformative power of forgiveness and the potential for personal redemption. It highlights the impact of acknowledging and rectifying wrongs, demonstrating that even deep wounds can heal and adversaries can find common ground in the pursuit of a more just and empathetic world. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a like, and this other video that likely appears on the screen now will also move you. Enjoy the session and see you in the next video.